You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Before we kickstart this show, find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, and on our new landing page at the bnhphoto.com/explorer/podcast. That was a website, in case you were curious. Leave us a comment on Explorer or a review on iTunes or email us at podcast@bhphoto.com. And remember, on our landing page, you can now find all back episodes, and you can leave us a voice message on the SpeakPipe widget, which we may play on the air if it's appropriate, so to speak. Special thanks to...
Maybe if it's not appropriate. Too.
Actually, if it's inappropriate, we might even crank up the volume a little bit. Thanks to John Buscal and Julie for leaving us feedback on our most recent episode, and to Leopold Desage for continued support.
I wonder if that's his real name.
Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of... We should actually have him on the show and find out all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. On today's episode, we will be talking about LED lighting in all its forms, and we'll be joined by Byron Atkinson, who's the manager in the B&H SuperStore lighting department, and Leslie Perez, who is a lighting expert from the very same department in the Superstore. But first, Al's Gearhead Pick of the Week. Got a lovely one here today. It is the Fotodiox Pro Thumb Grip for mirrorless digital cameras, Type A Black. I stumbled on this. I think these are really funny. What this is, if you remember back in the days, they used to have cameras that shot film, and to make the film go through the camera, if you didn't have a winder, there was a little thumb advance. Well, now you can get a fake thumb advance, which actually a real thumb advance that doesn't advance anything, that slips into the hot shoe. Think of this thing, it's sort of like a pacifier for Leica owners. People who just can't get past the fact that there's no film in the camera, so they put this little thing on there. It looks good, gives you a place to rest your thumb, because what else are thumbs doing these days? And they're kind of cool, and we do sell them, and they're only $14.95.
Do they move?
It doesn't move. It slips in. All it does, it slips into the hot shoe and sits there.
Okay.
And you can rest your thumb on it, right, which is why they call it a thumb grip.
Better than rest.
Waiter, check, please. Also, while we're on the topic of film, I told you this was going to be fun. While we're on the topic of film, for those of you who have these bizarre camera formats at home, I just noticed that Ilford has a special order. You can order, for the time being, 6x7-inch Delta 100 and 14x20-inch FP4, and you're ready for this? Ilford Ortho plus black and white negative film, 12 by 20 inches. So get out all those old banquet cameras and fire them up. We're back in business.
You want to turn this into the film photography podcast, right?
So we're going from film to the very latest technologies, LED lighting. Let's get right into this. Can you guys tell us a little bit of the history of LED?
Well, an LED is a light-emitting diode. Mm-hmm. They've been around for a very long time. But in the last 10 years, there's been a tremendous amount of development in terms of their use, in terms of their color, and what they're able to do. Mm-hmm. I'd say about 10 years ago, 2006, 2007, Light Panels was really the first company that brought the LEDs to everybody's attention. And then shortly thereafter, many companies started developing product. And the first product that generally hit the market were panels. They were either 1x1 panels or some variation smaller. Many of them were made in China. And many of the early LEDs were on the expensive side, and they had some color issues. They generally had color cast. And so 10 years ago, it wasn't uncommon when LEDs shipped, if you bought them, that you might find them with correction panels in them in order to remove the color cast.
And the panel.
So they would test batches and then color correct them with filtration before they shipped them?
It was less about testing batches.
But they just assumed it wasn't accurate and they put it in filters.
Now, light panels is kind of in a different class than many of the other companies. But what happened is that many other companies started manufacturing product. And one of the things that set light panels apart and set some of the other companies apart from one end, from the top end, from the middle and the bottom, was the degree of quality control that they did. So companies like light panels would go in and they would look at the LEDs that were put in the product. They would reject those that didn't meet their specifications. Other companies were less stringent about rejecting the LEDs that
So
weren't
it's
up
the
to snuff.
quality control of the individual LEDs that went into the unit itself. Is that correct?
That's one of the things that actually did set the LEDs apart 10 to 12 years ago from one another. The amount of quality control that the manufacturers that were done at the manufacturing
And
center.
was there a reason about 10 or 12 years ago that the evolution kind of took a leap forward? Was there some development that came along, or was it just a market issue that they were made affordable at this point, or do you know why?
Well, they were becoming more affordable, but they offered a great deal of flexibility. They offered battery power. In some cases, they offered lighting without heat.
So I guess we're going to get into some of the
And
advantages,
so
general
at
advantages.
that point, and they were small. There were smaller products on the market that were definitely more affordable. They could be used on top of cameras for people that were beginning to shoot video. And even some of the earlier small panels were aimed at still shooters who were looking for, who might need fill, when they were out shooting. So
Be portable and take them on location.
so all of those things really did contribute to the rise in the LED. And then, as you would find in most instances, whenever something gets done at the top end or at the studio end, and light panels was very big in terms of the one-by-one panel and studio application, there's kind of a trickle down. Everybody wants it and feels that it's something that they should begin to explore. And then you see more and more companies getting into the market, and that's exactly what happened. And so you had a number of companies that were direct sellers of LED panels. You could go to their website and order them directly, and they were less expensive than light panels and some of the other products that were in the market at the time and sold at retail establishments. And people began to embrace them and feel that, okay, the big studios may be using them, I can use these too. And
Taking off.
it took off.
I always got the impression that video is one of the reasons that came in, because now you have a light that could be used for video, stills and video.
Well, at the time that the LEDs were coming out, really, it was a video application that I really feel drove LED development. People 10, 12 years ago, when they were talking about doing photos or doing events, people were still very much focused on flash and flash photography. And that we began to see a change in that with the rise of the HDSLR, where you had the what I call the hybrid shooter, the guy that primarily shoots stills, or the woman who primarily shoots stills, and but also wants to dabble in video. And you can't do that with a flash on top of your camera.
Right.
And so people began to look at continuous light a little bit differently than they had in the past.
And jump over to Leslie here. Can you kind of give us, I don't know, your list of top 5 reasons why someone would go with LED compared to another light source?
Most of them actually do tend to be a lot more portable, which lately, especially at the store, we've been seeing a lot of people who are not from here. They're traveling like Brazil or Spain, France, etc., and they're multi-voltage. So they don't actually have to change the bulbs themselves. It's just given to them.
That's an interesting point, because with flash and a lot of the incandescent lamps and stuff, you have to actually change the bulbs and everything else. Here, the bulbs are just what they are, right?
Yeah,
Is that a safe assumption?
Not really with the flash, unless you talk about like monolights, because they have their modeling lamp, which is a tungsten.
Yeah, okay, right.
Yeah. But when it comes to like the tungsten lightings, then yes, you have to change the bulbs from there.
So it's not even an issue with LEDs. It's just a wash here.
Yeah.
That's
most
good.
of them do tend to be multi-voltage. They're also going to be the most flexible in terms of their color temperature changes. So they can go from like tungsten to daylight, and some people don't want to just gel it, which can also be like an easy fix. but to them, they'd rather just dial it in.
Are most LED lamps adjustable as far as color temperature? Or some of them fixed at either daylight or tungsten?
Some of them are fixed as daylight, not really tungsten. There are some fixtures throughout the store that are tungsten only for daylight.
Okay.
And then they're mainly going to be sold as a daylight version or a bicolor version.
Yeah, there are companies that do make tungsten versions of LEDs, and primarily in the broadcast world, where they used to use halogen or tungsten exclusively, there still are some studios that do like, and talent that does like the effect of the tungsten light. And so there are some companies that do make tungsten versions of their LED lights and daylight versions.
And how do they make the tungsten effect? You know, is it filtering or is it?
It's not a voltage change like with.
No, it's actually a part of the LED manufacturing process.
Okay.
So you can manufacture daylight LEDs, you can manufacture tungsten LEDs, or you can do bicolor.
Okay.
So it is part of that process.
So each diode itself is offering that.
So I'll give you an example. Xylite, for example, has a product called an F8. They make the F8 daylight. They make the F8 tungsten. Mole Richardson has some products that also are daylight and tungsten. There are companies like Light Panels, for example. Some of their Fresnels are actually daylight or tungsten. So it really depends on the manufacturer. It depends on who they perceive their market to be and what the demand is, and that's going to drive what they do. Now, Leslie did make a point, which in the store, we tend to see more people who buy bicolor LED fixtures or daylight.
But the ones that are adjustable, where you could dial in the color temperature, do they remain consistent?
In most of the panels, or many of the panels, the way that the LEDs are placed, they're alternating rows, daylight and tungsten. So if I dial in daylight, I have probably 60% of the panel lit. If I dial in tungsten, I have roughly 50 or 60% of the panel lit. And what happens is, because every other row is not lit. So in many of the bicolor fixtures, when I mix the light, it's actually going to be at its brightest because I have both sets of LEDs working.
So in other words, each individual LED is not shifting in color. What you're doing is you're turning some off and new ones on that are different color temperatures.
That's
is that correct?
Correct.
So let me jump back to some of the benefits. You mentioned power source and portability. Obviously, heat is a big issue. I mean,
or lack
of heat. And maybe you can extrapolate from there because that has a lot of effect on everything else in terms of how you deal with your talent, putting on gels, safety factors, things like that. No?
How much time you have to shoot ice cream?
Right.
Seriously.
Well, set up and breakdown times, things like that. Right?
If you're shooting most of the people who do end up coming into, I'm just talking about the store in general because that's where I'm at. They come in basically trying to do video and interview a person is usually a smaller setup. So the advantage is that you can actually put the lights pretty close to the subjects without burning them, having them sweat, etc., which you can't really do with a hot light. You can do it with a fluorescent, but also they tend to be bulkier. And fluorescent, some of them in video will flicker.
Yeah.
So in most of the LEDs, you actually have a flicker free. And if you dim it especially, you're not going to be seeing the flicker in most of it. Like fluorescents, you definitely cannot dim down. So if you want to also adjust your brightness, you can adjust it without a problem. Versus a fluorescent, you can't put a dimmer on it. So if you have too much light in the fluorescent, you're going to have to shut some of those bulbs off.
Right.
So
what about like safety issues? I mean, shock, again, power issues, something I know nothing about, but is there an advantage with LED in that case?
Yes. Fluorescents have mercury inside of them, so you have to be careful. If they do actually tend to break, you have to clear the space because you also don't want to get that on you because it's mercury poisoning at that point. So that is a safety plus that you get with the LED. LEDs don't have that. Right. Their bulbs last a lot longer, so you don't really have to change them out. And you're not going to burn yourself like a hot light.
I think those long fluorescent sets, they have those long fluorescent, I think they actually come with body bags in case the bulbs do break.
Well, some of them,
It's all self-contained.
Some of them actually do come with safety coating, so that if they do shatter, that they don't go all over the place. And now that's the tubes.
Yes.
So the spiral bulbs that are most common and probably the most economic option for many people in terms of fluorescent lighting are not coated. And those will shatter and break, and you do have to be concerned about the cleanup. As Leslie did indicate, they do have mercury in them, and you do need to treat it as a toxic cleanup. So that's really the difference.
What about shock, like electric shock, or is there any concerns there?
No, I mean as long as the electric cords are not worn, there should be no issue. As long as the battery is put on correctly, there should be no issue. So you actually should be absolutely fine.
You're drawing a lot less power, no?
You are drawing less power with an LED than you are with a traditional tungsten or halogen lamp.
And to the point where you can just plug it into a regular wall socket, or not necessarily?
Well, you can plug most of the fixtures into a regular wall socket. I mean, 500-watt light bulb, you can plug into a regular wall. The difference is that if I'm going somewhere and I have 3 lights and I have 3 500-watt bulbs and I plug them in, I do have to be concerned if I'm operating in somebody's house about tripping a circuit breaker, where I am not going to have that issue if I have 3 similarly sized and powered LED panels. So that there is a power advantage to working with LEDs.
I was once taking pictures of paintings in the New York Yacht Club, which is an ancient building, and we plugged in 2 500-watt tungsten lamps and took the building down. The whole place went dark. That was a big oops. I know that if you have a tungsten lamp, strobe, and fluorescence, the bulbs age and they tend to get warm or green in case of fluorescence. Do LEDs age that way too? Are they more consistent? Have you had any experience with that, or have they not been out long enough to know?
There can be some difference in them. Some companies actually do a better. I want to stop because I'm not going to say what I was about to say.
No. I think this is just between us. Feel free to speak. No one else is going to hear this, so just feel free. He almost fell for that.
That joke never gets old, Alan.
They do age, but it's probably not nearly as noticeable as some of the other types of light. One of the reasons that some people actually prefer to work with the same brand of LED is because the feeling is that the color is going to be a little more consistent even when they do age. But yes, technically they will. You will see some change in the LED over time.
And what would that change look like? Just the color cast, or
it will vary because it depends on where the LED came from, how it was manufactured. But I think that most people would not notice the color shift, and I mean that's something that we probably should talk a little bit about. There are different types of people that are using these lights. You have, what I call the cinematography world, where color consistency and color temperature are treated very differently. That person and what they're looking for is going to be very different than somebody who's shooting a wedding, who's just looking to light the bride and light the groom, or light a scene or a table. And they're less worried about, the color being precise. And that's something which you really do have to recognize.
How are LEDs on skin tone?
It really does depend on the LED because, some LEDs they're daylight, but they may be warmer. Some LEDs may be bluer. So it really depends on the light, and it will also depend on the subject that people are shooting. Sure. And one of the things that we will oftentimes ask when people are buying LEDs, and we ask them, what are you using it for? And they'll say, well, I'm shooting people. do you want daylight or do you want a bicolor? And they'll go, well, what's the difference? And one of the things that a bicolor allows them to do is to warm up or cool the light without having to add filters. And there are a lot of people who find that extremely attractive because it means that they can work with a variety of skin tones with different undertones and be able to address them without having to get cellophane sheets and put them on top of light.
How accurate? Because again, our eyes perceive color different than film or a digital sensor would do it. When you tweak color like that, say for a portrait, and you just want to say warm it or cool it, is it pretty? When you get your picture back, would it be fairly close? Are they? Oh, you're making a strange face again.
I'm smiling.
So okay. So there are variations there too.
In a lot of instances, it's not just the light; it's also how your camera is set that influences what comes directly out of the camera.
So can I ask? Again, this is definitely a beginner question, but what can you use LED for powerful strobe lighting, or no? It's only continuous light, or is that not true?
It's basically, there are some companies that have tried to do LEDs that strobe, but the effect is nowhere near the amount of power that you would get out of a traditional strobe.
So it's just a power issue.
Yeah. So it's really an issue of power.
And what is? I mean, when I think of LED, I think of a flat panel. So you have all these small diodes. Is that it, or do they make bulbs?
They
bulbs?
also make bulbs, and besides,
well, they're the chip-on-board LEDs, which actually translate as single-source type lights, and that's been one of the later developments in LEDs. 5-10 years ago, everybody was doing panels. And now what you see Fresnel type lights. You see LED, for lack of a better word, monolights, where they effectively read as a single light coming out of coming off the chip. And you can add soft boxes and other reflectors and approximate the look that you would get out of a traditional flash.
Okay.
So that's a direction which...
And how are they shaped? I mean, is it a tube? The fixture is a tube, and there's a bunch of small diodes in there that come out like one, or
it translates into if you look at it, most of them are covered, but it really translates out. It's a small chip, and it really puts out a lot of light, but it translates into a single light source as opposed to being 500 different LED bulbs.
Is that because of a lens that's in front of it, or just the chip itself?
It's in part how the chip is manufactured, but each manufacturer has a different way of dealing with how they cover it, and so it's an integral part of it. You'll find that the spreads, for example, are very different. There's some that, coming directly out of the light with no modifier will give you 180 degrees worth of spread. There are others at 120. There are others that are 75. There are others that work the same way that a Fresnel does, adjusting forward or backwards, which will give you a range from, say, 15 degrees to 70 degrees. So it will really vary. But that's a development in the LED story that, 10 years ago, I never saw that coming. They've gotten smaller. They've gotten more powerful. You now have some that actually are color tunable. And when I say color tunable, try, a couple of million different shades so that gelling your lights is no longer a necessity. I was going
to ask about that. Like, what's the gel industry looking like now that people are going to LEDs? But
well, filters are challenged altogether because of digital. It's just another challenge for them.
So what, maybe Leslie can ask you this, what can you not use LEDs for nowadays? What, unless you're, in general, what can't they do?
They can't fill out a big amount of space, like theater, let's say. You're going to need not just one, you're going to need multiples of them, probably like 10, 20 sometimes, depending obviously which fixture you're getting.
Even group portraits, I would imagine, would be a challenge.
It would.
So you have 4 or 5 people, right?
Oh, there was one person who wanted to get LEDs to light up a theater of about 300 people. He was wanting to get like even lighting throughout the entire place, and he wanted to get just 2 LEDs. And we're like, that's not even
How
possible.
long was his exposure going to be?
So we're just like, that's not even going to happen.
We're not there yet.
No.
So power.
He's probably
is
thinking of
not a
those
big issue.
Jumbotron TVs like you see on the side of Macy's and in Times Square. Oh, just going to get a real big, just pop them in there.
Well, how big do they make panels? Like how big can you get?
I look at it a little bit differently. Can they be used to to light a portrait of 6 or 7 people? Sure, they can. But the thing that you do have to think about is, okay, you're not going to be shooting at f11 or f14 at that point. So, there are other considerations that you have to take into account when you decide that you're going to work with continuous lights or you're going to work with the LEDs. And as long as you're cognizant of those things and you understand what their limitations are and you address them, then there's not a lot that they can't be used for.
Yeah, that's within reason, though, because obviously, if you have somebody, let's say, like Lois Greenfield or some of the other guests we've had on here that shoot dance, and Lois, she'll have 6 people caught midair in perfect formation. You could line the whole studio with LEDs. You ain't doing that.
I can't do it with an LED, but that has to do with understanding what they're capable of doing and what the limitations are.
Working within the limitations of the device. Yes.
If I said I wanted to shoot a dancer, I could shoot a dancer with an LED.
As long as they're not dancing.
As long as they're not dancing, exactly. But if moving is the priority, if jumping and capturing them sharp in midair is a priority, then no, the LED is not the right light.
Exactly.
A lot of times it's about experimenting.
Yeah.
But, again, if you're trying to shoot at f11 or f14, no, you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
There is a pulsation, though, in the light. Is there or no in an LED? Does it pulse at all?
The only time I guess it'll pulse is if you're trying to bring the brightness up, but it also depends on the fixture, the way that they're made, with either if it's like a dial or if it's like a button you're pressing to turn up the brightness. That's about the only time you'll ever see it.
What about if somebody has already like invested in a tungsten system? Can you swap out bulbs and use LED bulbs on an old?
Yes and no.
Okay.
If the fixture has like an Edison base, like a typical household base, yes. But if it's like, let's just say the Lowell Toda has like an EMD bulb.
Right.
No, because those are specific bulbs for those lights. So there are some that you can turn into an LED if you already have a system, but only if they're like the Edison based. That's about it.
But you also have to think about the size of some of those bulbs because, depending on how much power the bulb has, it may be substantially larger than its tungsten equivalent.
To be equivalent.
And it may or may not fit
Physically
into the, when you put the shade or, whatever diffusion in front of it, it may or may not fit. So that's always something that you do have to take into account.
And so the bulbs, the LED bulbs, to be equivalent to tungsten are generally bigger. They're, is that fair to say or no?
Not necessarily, but it's a sticky wicket because what happens is a lot of times people already have a fixture and then they want to come in and they want to use an LED bulb. And it may be that the fixture came with a reflector and the LED bulb, depending on its power, might be bigger than the reflector. So it's not going to harness the light the way that the tungsten bulb will. It may be the case where the bulb is so large that the LED bulb is so large that you may not be able to get, the softbox on top. And I mean, I'm thinking of a particular instance with a fixture that I have where Chimero makes a fixture called a triolet. And the beauty of this fixture is it can take either mogul-based bulbs, which are hot bulbs up to 1,000 watts. It can take 2-pin bulbs, so halogen bulbs, or you can put in an adapter, which will allow you to put in an Edison-based bulb. And so I put in a 4-way adapter, and this is supposed to fit into one of the Chimera lanterns, so you can hang it overhead. And then I tried to put in the LED bulbs, and the LED bulbs were actually too big. and would not allow the lantern to go on. So it's things like, it's an extreme example, but it's a case where you really do have to understand the size of the bulb and the limitation based on what reflector or what you're trying to use it in.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. Send us a tweet at BH Photo Video, #BH Photo Podcast.
We are back. Here's a question for you now. Somebody comes in and they say they want to buy LED lighting. I mean, where do you start?
Well, the place that we like to start is finding out a little bit more about what they're doing, so what they're shooting. Whether
the same thing as if they came in saying, I want to buy a camera. You got to know, what are you doing?
Well,
same thing.
We call them qualifying questions.
Yes.
But
yes.
That's effectively what you're doing. You need to understand what they're doing. It also helps to understand what camera they're using, so that you understand how they might be using the camera and what the different amounts of light may be.
Yeah. Is it safe to assume that if I'm coming in with one of those 12 by 20 inch banquet cameras that I was hawking the film for earlier, you're not going to recommend LEDs for me?
I'm not going to recommend LEDs.
I had a feeling about that. Back to flashlights. Okay. We spoke real briefly about like a wedding. And if somebody was coming and saying, I'm a wedding photographer, I want LEDs, you're not going too far with them on this conversation.
Not necessarily. It depends. There are LED products which are very effectively used for wedding photography.
Tell us about it.
For example, the Lowell GL1, which is kind of like a drill bit. It looks like a power tool, but it's handheld. It's a very powerful tungsten-colored LED, and there are a number of wedding photographers that will actually have an assistant hold it, shine the light in a particular direction to illuminate something, and use that as either a main light or to fill, working with the ambient light. You have to remember, a lot of times wedding photographers are trying to capture moments in a reception hall. So it's not about doing a formal portrait. It's about capturing, a snapshot of a real-time moment.
It's combat photography in many ways.
And you're using the ambient light. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, an LED may be just the kick that you need to illuminate the subject or illuminate some aspect of the scene, and they work very well. Westcott has another product, the
Ice Light.
Thank you, Ice Light 2.
Ice Light 2.
Which a lot of photographers like and use it to give a nice little slash of light on a subject.
And is this something handheld also?
It can be handheld, yeah.
Okay.
There's also barn doors you can add to it if you just want to control the light a little bit more instead of spilling it kind of everywhere.
And is that, with LEDs in general, you can add all the things you need to as well as you could with other types of lighting? Are they at that stage yet? Not necessarily.
It depends on the light. Some lights you can add accessories to. There are other lights which the light is what it is, and there's not a whole lot you can do to modify it except either put a gel on it or put some sort of diffusion on it to soften the light.
What about on-camera lights? Can you recommend any that are good? Let's say, again, we're talking photography more than videography here, but...
I can actually give you a really good example that I just last week used myself. There's a small unit made by Bolt, which I saw on our website, and I just bought it. I loved it, believe it or not. It's a little gizmo. It sits on the accessory shoe of your camera. It holds AA batteries and has two metal gooseneck come out of it with small white, like 2-inch discs that have LED arrays. And you could bend them around, but for doing close-up stuff, the camera's right on it. And I'm moving these two little lights around to model the light, and I'm shooting, and it's all on camera, and it's tiny. And it worked really very well. The only shortcoming was that reflective surfaces, even though it's a white disc, you could see all those little points of light going on. And yes, I'll do some Photoshop play, but it was a neat tool for very simple, close, tight shots.
That's for macro shooting.
Macro shooting. Very specific. Yeah, I'm not shooting a wedding with it, that's for sure. Unless they want to sit still all night. But
one on each eye. But anything off the top of your guys' head that you would recommend? Any on-camera light panels?
There is this one company, VidPro, They make this one LED that comes with the barn. Well, it has the barn doors on them, and then it comes with the charger and the batteries and also the AC adapter. And for the price, it seems to be right for a lot of people, especially if they're just starting out and they just want something simple and like quick. And it's actually pretty powerful for what it is. And it's bicolor as well.
People that are shooting ENG style, like lighting on camera. And I do think that there's one thing that you do have to be careful when you start talking about LEDs on camera. They are, if you're shooting, shooting people, the light can be extremely bright. And so if you're working with LED on camera, the one thing that you will want to do is make sure that you get models that are dimmable. And if they don't come with diffusion, and most do these days, but in the event that you do buy one that doesn't have diffusion, then I would advise buying a sheet of diffusion, something like a quarter white diffusion, which can be doubled or tripled depending on the effect that you want. But those would be what I would recommend if people are working with or want to work with lighting on camera. But we always maintain that the most creative lighting and the greatest number of options you're really going to experience when you take the light off camera.
Are there any and I know floodlights are easy because it's kind of diffused, and that's the general nature of them. Are there any spotlights or real point of light sources that are available with LEDs? Or are we not there yet?
Well, what are you trying to...
In other words, right now, you can have a focused spot with a Fresnel on. You'll have a real sharp point of light hitting something if you're using strobe or tungsten. Do LEDs have anything like that where you could just concentrate that light into a real tight spot?
You can. Dito light, for example.
So I remember Ditos when they were tungsten, so now they're LED?
Correct. But Dito has a line of LED lights available, and their projection attachments, which will allow you to focus the light, do fit on their LEDs. So you do have the ability to focus the light much in the same way and get that real tight, sharp edge light that you would if you were using tungsten.
For those who listening who are not familiar with Dito lights, it's DEDO. And what's interesting, this is a system of lights that was designed by a theatrical lighting director. And essentially, they are miniaturized theater lights. You can go in and photograph a ring as if it was a theater production. And they're phenomenal. But it's interesting to note that they also make them LED now. That's good.
And so, but in general, LED lights, when we're talking about off-camera lighting or even on-camera, we're talking about flat panels of different, or not?
Not necessarily. Okay. I mean, the world of the LED Fresnel, has really come of age. ARRI.
BBS lighting.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Dracast. BBS lighting.
BBS.
ICANN. All the major manufacturers of LED lights have moved into other areas, and the big other area that they're now in are Fresnels. So the world of LEDs continues to change. And
of the ones you mentioned, can you recommend, I mean, not to trash one or the other, but is there one that you recommend for certain applications of the models you just talked about?
You know, I really believe that lighting is very personal. You know, it's one of those things that you come in, you touch it, you feel it, you see what the light does, and you're either attracted to it or you say, you know, next. All those brands that we just mentioned make absolutely phenomenal products. They're at different price points. And the one thing that I do say today is that there is no reason why anybody should ever say that I can't afford to buy lights, because there's lighting available at every price point for a multitude of applications.
The largest flat panel LED that we have right now available on the floor, if somebody was shooting with one of those, say a portrait, and I'm just throwing a size, 2 by 3 feet roughly. If that was, say, doing a single portrait of one person or maybe a couple, and it's going to be, say, about 3.5 feet away, roughly 4 feet away. About what f-stop are they at ISO 100? I mean, is this looking to be like real low light? Are we going to be stopping down to 811, or we can be up near 2804?
I probably would not be at ISO 100.
You're going to be a lot higher than that.
I would probably be starting at 400.
Okay.
And then looking at what my shutter speed actually is.
A static shot. No one's moving. They're sitting still. They're not excited.
But still, you really do have to think about shutter speed because, people can only sit still but so long. The eye can only, not blink but for so long.
You cauterize them. It works a lot better. That's what I do.
And so you really do have to, that's part of the equation. But, when I work with continuous light, I rarely am working at ISO 100. One, because the camera companies have told me that these tools have this phenomenal ability to shoot clean images at higher ISOs,
and they do,
and it has changed the lighting equation, whether you're working with strobes or whether you're working with continuous light.
Right. Points taken. The largest panel that we would have right now for LEDs would be around what size?
You have to be careful when we start talking about large panels.
Okay.
Because if you're mobile, a large panel is a pit or a pita.
A pit or a pita?
A pain in the tuchus.
Thank you.
Or,
okay, yes.
Okay, we're not going to record that.
Or a lovely sandwich bread, yes.
I think that might stay in. That was pretty good.
But seriously, the one thing that you really do have to think about is, what you're going to do with something and how heavy it is and how mobile it is. And so while it may be great in theory to talk about a large panel, the reality is if I need mobility
two or three smaller
or if I need to move things around, that might not be the best option.
That's a good point.
So there are companies, and we had mentioned the DS1 before by Digital Sputnik, but that's a light which is a fairly small light. And I'm going to say it's no more than 4.5 by 4.5 by 4.5 in terms of the way it's shaped. But you can actually stack them.
But that's inches you're talking about.
Yeah. You can actually stack them and create a larger light and then put a scrim in front of them or put a softbox on it and create light. So there are ways that you can deal with changing the size of light without necessarily starting out with a ginormous panel. Mm-hmm. And again, if you're looking for mobility or you've got to take it up and put it up or take it down, size can work against you.
That's a good point. That's a great
point. So at this
point,
LED panels are really optimized for just photographing very small people. Is that what you're saying? Sorry, couldn't resist.
Byron, it's 25 inches by 11 for the 60, and then it's 50 inches by 11 for the 120.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There you have it. Thank you.
We touched on them kind of one by one, at the beginning. But if there would be a way to just kind of summarize the advantages of an LED.
Their flexibility, like one of them literally, their flexibility, the Westcott Flex lights.
Oh, yeah?
You can actually shape them around and Velcro it to like the wall because they're so thin. So their portability, they're getting smaller and thinner and people love them because, especially when they're traveling. So that's one thing, the flexibility and the portability and being able to change color.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about the variable color models, or what's the latest in LED in terms of being able to change your colors?
The RE Sky panels have been very popular since they also have the gels all integrated into them. So it would be like the Roscoe gels, the Lee gels, and I think GAM is another one included inside. So you can literally just dial them all in. Like if you want like the Roscoe 39, the exotic skeleton sangria is the name of it.
So in general,
you
can dial colors to your heart's content at this point. There's not much in terms of limitations.
No. Mm-hmm.
No. Then you have a company like Digital Sputnik that has the DS1. It's been used a lot on some of the big budget movie sets, and it has an absolute killer app that with a color wheel that you can actually dial in whatever color it is that you want. And I think one of the things that we see as a trend in LEDs is a movement towards where many manufacturers are now developing apps, iOS and Android, to be able to control the lights, power, color. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward.
And then
Multi-voltage, so in most cases they can be used anywhere in the world.
There you go.
Many of them are able to be run off of
Batteries?
14.4 volt batteries, or even the camcorder style battery.
Is it safe to assume there's also dual, a type that are battery or AC? You can go
Yes.
either way.
Yeah, and many of the, particularly panels, many of the panels now come with a battery plate, as well as the AC option.
I think another good advantage of these kind of lights, especially the smaller ones, if they're battery powered, is if you're photographing, say, interiors, sometimes you can't bury a light in a place. You have to light a corner or something, but there's no place to bury a light because it stands and you got cords. These are small and flexible, and you could like attach them to the walls, tape them, stick them behind things. So it's a way of lighting up little crevices and other things that would otherwise go dark in the background. So it's fill lights. They're great.
Well, that's very true. I mean, there are lights like the Lummi Tube, which you can take this cube and they're basically 9 levels of adjustability of light, but you can stick it in a corner or underneath a piece of furniture and get some light in a place where you ordinarily might not be able to, and have it translate in your video or in your photograph, so that it begins to add some dimension. So
and it's WYSIWYG, so as you're setting it up, you see what your effect is going to be, not like Flash, where you have to really do extra testing.
also,
well, that's another thing that we didn't talk about. I mean, one of the advantages and when we started out, of continuous light over Flash in general, is the what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
That you're able to turn it on and you have an idea of exactly where the shadows are going to fall, what's illuminated, what's not, and there's a lot of guesswork that's removed.
And if you're under a time restraint and you're like portrait people coming and going, that's great to be able to just see that, okay, it's good, boom, catch the picture. As opposed to Flash, where you're never really quite sure exactly what you have. Mm-hmm. So that's a good point. Yeah.
you can also throw the Lummi Cube into water because it's waterproof.
Right.
So it's another advantage to LEDs where some of them are water resistant or waterproof. Light in Motion is another one that's waterproof. Most of them. I keep saying most of them.
I once threw a speed light into water.
I wouldn't recommend that.
It didn't work afterwards, but I did it. But no.
I mean, you can do it
What
for
about,
one-time use.
Price-wise, I mean, the LED bulbs are still more expensive, or is that not true?
Well, it depends on the LED bulb. So if you're talking about going to your hardware store and buying an LED bulb, that's one type of bulb. But if you're looking at buying some of the photographic ones, which are color temperature-wise, either at 5,500 Kelvin or 5,000 degrees Kelvin, then they are a little more costly.
Well, what I'm hearing mostly is that there's just kind of a wide range of creative possibilities.
Well, there really is. That's the thing about lighting. It's not you can't light by numbers. If you're really going to effectively light, it's about being creative. It's about doing something perhaps which is unconventional. It's about experimenting.
And 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to be seeing a lot more LEDs. What do you see for the future?
They've gotten smaller and more powerful. And I tend to think that that's something which is going to continue. I think there are manufacturers out there that are going to really push the envelope. I think that some of the innovation may not necessarily come from the players or all of the major players that we know now. Over the past couple of years, crowdfunding has become a much more important option for people that are looking to bring product to the market. I think that's something which is going to continue. So, there's probably somebody playing in their garage right now that has an idea that a year from now or 2 years from now, may bring something which is pretty revolutionary to the forefront. One of the things that I actually see coming is how we talk about light and brightness. and this is part of the reason I have an issue with CRI, because people come in and they ask a couple of questions. They ask what the CRI is, and then you go, okay, it's 90. And then they go, and so what's the wattage equivalent? And it's a tungsten wattage equivalent, so you'll say 400 watts. And the question is, what does that really mean? And what's going to happen what's happening is that I think we're going to see a shift in how we talk about brightness. We're going to be seeing more companies describe their lights in terms of lumens, which is a brightness output. And it is much easier to compare lights that way.
It's standardizing it by doing
than
that.
to turn around and say, well, it's 400 watt equivalent. So if I say it's a 400 watt equivalent, is it a 400 watt Fresnel? Is it a 400 watt floodlight? Is it 400 watts in a softbox? All of those things.
Is it city or highway
variables.
driving?
Exactly.
That's really what it is, yeah.
And the one thing that I hope to see is more companies moving to lumens so that we actually can compare absolute brightness.
Okay. Byron Atkinson, Leslie Perez, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are in our New York City Superstore, come and say hi to them. Look around all of our LED lighting. They'll be happy to give you a guided tour. You should see the expressions on their faces right now. It's great. Anyway, another show wrapped up, a great show. Remember to give us your feedback. Give us a review on iTunes if you have a moment, a SpeakPipe voice message, or tweet us with the hashtag BHPhotoPodcast at BHPhotoVideo. And thanks, as always, to John and Jason. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today.